Hello, my name is Sandra Pires. I'm the cultural attaché at the Embassy of Portugal in Washington, D.C. Today, for the Day of Portugal, Camões, and the Portuguese communities, we are having our second edition of the Quarantine Talks. Our invitees today are the Minister of Science, Technology, and Higher Education, Manuel Heitor. Thank you for coming and welcome.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I would like to ask you, since we are in this Day of Portugal, Camões, and the Portuguese communities, what does this day mean to you?
Let me thank you, first of all, for the invitation. It's always a great pleasure to share ideas with you, and particularly with the Portuguese community in the United States, either in Washington or New York City or elsewhere. That is a broad question that can certainly have several answers, but I would like to concentrate in one specific issue. Certainly, the day of our country is always a day to remember our capacity to behave as a country, as a nation, but also to foster sovereignty. And we know more and more that sovereignty can only be achieved with more knowledge, with more skilled people. And certainly, I believe in the Day of Portugal, we should also commemorate all of them that certainly learn and create their own task force to learn more and more, not only about Portugal, certainly about Portuguese culture, but also for Portugal to become more and more an independent country, certainly engage in networks, namely within our European landscape, and always with our strategic and long-term partners across the Atlantic, but always to preserve the Portuguese sovereignty in terms of culture, in terms of dignity, and in terms of our capacity to produce and diffuse new knowledge.
Thank you very much. And we have here today with us also the president of the Luso-American Development Foundation, Rita Faden. And I would like to ask you the same question. What is since we are doing this show on the Day of Portugal, I would like to ask you what does it mean to you specifically? Or if you do something special during this day?
Hello, Sandra. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here on this initiative organized by the Portuguese Embassy in Washington and to be able to share with you some views on this day. I have to say that for me, the conscience that I have and the link that I have to the Day of Portugal changed a lot since I started commemorating that day abroad, because I think we gain a better understanding of the importance of commemorating this day when we are outside Portugal. And for me, it was a great experience when in 2018, I was able to be with the President of the Republic and with the Prime Minister commemorating the Day of Portugal in the United States. And we went first to Boston on the 10th of June and then to Providence. And it was an unforgettable experience to see the connection between the Portuguese communities and the interest and the links that were very present in that day. So I would say that I understand better now the connection and the interest and the love for the country that we all feel, but we feel different, I would say, when we are outside Portugal and when we have that opportunity. And for me, it was a great opportunity, and it has changed the way and the importance that I now recognize to the Day of Portugal.
Thank you very much. And we also have here with us Mafalda Santos. She's a cellist, and she's a fellow at the Peabody Institute of the Johns Hopkins University. Mafalda, welcome. And what does the Day of Portugal means to you specifically? Mafalda is just a brief. Mafalda is in the United States, so she has been living here for 3 years. So maybe she has a different, like Rita was saying before, that she has she is near the community somehow because she's living here for 3 years in the US.
Right. So, I mean, for me, it's a bit more temporary. Well, first of all, hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm very curious to see how our perspectives are different, since we're such different people with different occupations. So, I mean, for me, especially this year, in specific circumstances, so I wasn't able to go home. I'm staying with a friend with a very generous family here in New York. And for me, this is a day to brag particularly and be particularly obnoxious about my heritage. So I'm, as a Portuguese person, we sometimes are not raised exactly to be proud all the time of what we are, and we have this culture of saying that our country is the worst, and we usually only value things after we see it from an outside perspective. So I think that this year, being here is a day that I will share some desserts with the family I'm staying with, some codfish, some very overpriced codfish that I hope is good, that I bought for this day. And just overall something that I don't know, I've been sharing music, the concert that is going to happen later with this family also. So I don't know, this day, these kinds of holidays are always special to celebrate where we come from, to be particularly aware of this common heritage and to cherish it, to be particularly proud of it. So that's what I've been thinking about.
Good. And now changing a little bit the subject, changing a little bit because we are still living the pandemic, but in a different way. And we are even celebrating the Day of Portugal in a different way because of the pandemic. So going in that direction, I would like to ask you, how did it affect you in personally, in a personal level, Rita?
Okay. I mean, at the beginning, we were all surprised by. I mean, suddenly, here in Portugal, the state of emergency was decreed on the 13th of March. And that week things were accelerating because suddenly schools started to close, and we understood each day the severity of the situation because we were following the news, especially from Italy and Spain. So for us in Portugal, it was very clear. I mean, I would say since the beginning of March, at least, that this was very complicated and there was a need to take some measures. So we started. I mean, suddenly we all had to start teleworking, which was an experience that I didn't have before. And so, first of all, it was trying to organize things so that everyone in flat could work from home. We were not prepared for it, frankly, so it was a challenge to. And then it was also a challenge to make it work for everyone. To at the same time that people were in home, in their houses, so we were apart. But there was a need to maintain the link to floods and the team spirit. And so, I mean, little by little, we started and we learned how to do it online via, online meetings, via Zoom meetings, all of that, and we adjust. From a personal point of view, because that's what you asked, I would say it was a challenge for me as it was for everyone. There was a need to adapt to this thing that suddenly I had to mix work and house, and for me it was home. It was something that I always try to separate, to separate the work from my home. But suddenly it was not possible, so it was an adjustment. I have to say that I'm not a fan of teleworking. So now, since the beginning of June, I have started to work some days presently, and from the next Monday, I will stop working teleworking. I don't like this mix. I prefer to have separate environments. That's it.
It's understandable. That's what we are used to, right?
Yes.
And Manuel Heitor, I would like to ask you as well, how did you adapt to these new circumstances by your personal point of view to the pandemic?
Thank you very much. I will refer essentially three issues. First, the decrease of, say, personal relations and the way that we cannot understand where people are with our cities very empty. I felt very, very strange in personal and professional ways. But at the same time, I felt a rather need to run against time. Now that most of the critical issues have passed and we hope we are restarting in a very active way, it seems to me that the last 3 months were almost 3 years in terms of events, in terms of the need to act very fast. And in fact, the initial weeks were very time consuming in terms of the amount of things were done in so fastly. My third issue was essentially this building up of trust and also to pass the message to people that we need to live with uncertainties. It is not possible to design or to conceive or to understand a society without a risk. And this is a lesson for all of us. How can we better understand that we need to know and to understand a society which is always subject to risks, either from the health issue or other type issue. And this needs for us to better understand that we need to better face risk and to live with each other, but always understanding that there are a number of social and economic relations that we need to sustain, although we need to better deal with risk, I believe, imposed in us a daily way of life, which is certainly different from the potential understanding that we may live in a society without any type of risk, which I believe all of us have been waken up that in fact there are risks and we will need to understand those risks for the future. They are not away anywhere.
Thank you. And Mafalda, how do you see how was it for you personally in your personal life? What has changed with this pandemic? I'm sure several things have changed.
Right. My experiences as a musician and as a student, so those have different levels of change. So what started happening is that, musicians, our lives is to spend endless hours in a practice room by ourselves, doing really obnoxious work, trying to make good sounds, figuring out how our body works to produce those sounds, and then trying to encode those sounds in our bodies, like how much degrees, how many angles do I have to change, all these things. And of course, all these things are worth it because we have performances. So all of these things culminate in some sort of glorious, the public sees 30 minutes, there's thousands of hours behind it. So what happened is that gradually all of these glamorous moments that we were working for were canceled. So of course, the beginning of the heartbreak was all of the hard work that we had been doing, preparing programs through the months. What was just gradually, and some companies in the beginning were saying, oh, we might stay open, the show might go on. So there was this bit of denial, this bit of delusion. So it was very strange because you still had a little bit of hope, but you also didn't. And of course, you have to keep practicing, although you sort of feel like crap. So that's sort of how it felt in the beginning. And of course, on a practical level, loss of income, because the core of music making is in person. Of course, we can play online and we can do all sorts of things, but the core of what we do is playing with humans, talking to humans, and having humans very close together looking at us. So of course, all of that disappeared. So all the cancellations, all these things. And I was talking to you actually before we started the live stream about the concert at 5 p.m. because I chose to do something that musicians are being creative about and doing a lot more of layering themselves. So I don't have any orchestra to play with here in this home, so I just have myself and my own cello. So I decided to do this thing of layering 4 versions of myself. playing different parts, like a chorus of cellos. And what happens is that so much of our communication in a live concert is, of course, most of it is nonverbal, but a lot of it is like what we perceive in terms of timing, intonation. It's all these abstract things that can change, in a million ways. So playing with myself is like playing with the worst band on the planet. We disagree on everything, and I was censoring because a big portion of it is being my own critic. So I was seeing these videos and being like, what the heck are you doing there? Why did you play that way? That's out of tune. Why did you do rhythm that way? And I had recorded it 30 seconds before. So of course, we have all this technology and we can do all these cool things and teach online and all these things. But a big portion of it is hoping that the live concerts will come back soon. That's what it is.
So yeah, hopefully, because it's interesting. It's also interesting to explore different things. I don't know at the personal level if you felt more connected to other people that you were not connecting before, and in a professional level, we had to find other skills that we didn't really understand before. Like Mafalda, that is doing a concert. By the way, I want to ask you to stay with our page, because at 5 p.m. from the US, 10 p.m. in Portugal, Mafalda perform a concert for us, and later we can talk a little bit about the concert if you want, Mafalda.
Sure.
So I would also like to ask Manuel Heitor, that Portugal has been an example of dealing with the pandemic, and being the Minister of Science, Technology and Higher Education, I believe your professional life was very much affected by the COVID-19 situation. Would you like to talk a little bit about that?
Yes, certainly. And thank you very much for the question. And always, I should start by recognizing the work by many health professionals, medical doctors, nurseries, and many others that has dealt with the situation in a daily life in hospitals, from cleaning services to support services to patients, and we need them. And certainly the pandemic crisis in Portugal and many other parts of the world has clearly shown up that we have a very strong and solid health service. And this is certainly a reality which is very much different from the United States, that we should acknowledge and recognize and try to build it more and more by training people and by strengthening our public health system, which performs very well. But also, I pay particular attention to the role of the scientific community. And these were a number of issues which do require a strong recognition, but also a sense of the need to do more and more with science and innovation. For instance, on the days were very important to do testing and more testing. As you know, Portugal is one of the countries worldwide with more tests per thousand inhabitants. We are really in the very top. And one contribution beyond all of those testing done through the national health services was done through the scientific labs, which have mobilized themselves and turned their scientific equipments into testing services. And in fact, it started with a major research lab, which has adapted the international protocol from the Center for Diseases to a way to use raw materials developed in Portugal to decrease our dependence from external sources. And then they passed that protocol to a network. Nowadays is about 21 different research labs, which mobilize students, researchers to test particularly the elderly, in the centers for the elderly from the social security services, and also the most vulnerable. And this was a movement of science, but also of scientific capacity with a strong social solidarity, which has mobilized more than, as I mentioned, 20 different labs throughout the country. Certainly those which have a long standing work in the biomolecular and biomedical research, but also others, like in the far east north of the country in Bragança was the lab on mountain research that changed completely their labs, or in the south in Évora were a lab on agriculture biotechnology that changed their labs and tried to mobilize all their instruments and capacity to work with the health system and do testing. But also other examples are important. For instance, our major engineering center on aerospace and aeronautical engineering has mobilized all their engineers to produce ventilators, which now have already been exported to Brazil. And in less than 45 days, they produce a top-ranked ventilator at the level of those used in intensive care units in hospitals. And now, as I mentioned to you, they are not being necessary anymore in Portugal because we decrease very much our number of patients in intensive care units, but they are being used already in Brazil, and they are ready to be also export to Africa. And this was again a unique movement between technical people and certainly a number of companies. Certainly, we have several other examples, particularly with startups. Startups were particularly technical startups and biomedical startups, where they were very entrepreneur in developing diagnostic kits, again, particularly devoted to the elderly and to the most vulnerable, because we know that this crisis increased very much the social divide between those which have easy access to all services and those which are behind. And this was very important way the Portuguese scientific community mobilized themselves towards the development of new instruments, the mobilization of their labs, the development of biomedical devices, which were not typical of the Portuguese industrial and economic structure. And now we have also a number of new devices which have developed all this area, and certainly creates a new relationship between society at large and scientists in particular. And I believe was important overall to better understand why we need more and more to invest in science, certainly for specific reasons, but also to build capacity and our sovereignty to face crises like this one.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And Mafalda, you already spoke a little bit about your work, how it's changed, but I mean, you also had classes that were canceled, right? You had classes that were canceled or classes that went online instead of being presential. So would you like to talk a little bit about that too?
Yeah, I mean, a big portion of a music course cannot really be translated into online. So a lot of the classes just had to disappear or become extremely impaired. So, for example, chamber music is playing music with a small group of people, so that was canceled, and we just got the free A. Orchestra was canceled. We also got the free A or the pass, and a bunch of these classes that are actually why we're in university, and the most important parts had to be canceled. But I mean, there's other classes that do translate well, such as humanities, philosophy, literature, all these things. Can go no problem. Music history can go no problem. Even ear training, singing, and all these things went online without many issues. But unfortunately, I mean, if this is going to go over to the fall semester, it's a bit complicated, and people have been brainstorming other options and how to go about this, because I'm sure it's extremely hard to coordinate I mean, we have recitals that I was going to have a junior recital in the end of my third year in March. And many people had their final recitals from senior year that were also canceled. So it's hard to quantify how much of our education relies on human connection.
Yeah, that's true. True that. And Rita Faden. So I saw that the flood celebrated the 35th year,
Yes.
like a few days ago, in the end of March, at the May, I mean. And I had the chance to watch some videos for the occasion, but I suppose that maybe you wanted to celebrate it in a very different way, the 35th year of flood existence. And so, in terms of your work at Flood, in terms of professionally, how did it change with the pandemic?
It's changed a lot. But first, I would just like to say something. I find it really interesting, Sandra, that you were able to join three people so different as
Yes.
ourselves. We have totally different backgrounds and also, I would say, personal styles. But what is very interesting is that we all reflect the strangeness of these times and the lack of human connection. It was something that we all missed when we were saying about the impact in our personal lives. And I think it's interesting because all of us being so different, we all lack the same, and we all feel the same need for human connection. As you were saying, I mean, this year is the flood, as we will be 35th anniversary, and we were planning a big party, and we were planning lots of initiatives. We had a fantastic calendar with lots of activities, and then suddenly we had to change everything, and we understood that. I mean, all the initiatives that we had were no longer possible, and we needed to shift course and to redirect our activities. Because FLAD is a Portuguese foundation, but our goal is to contribute to the development of Portugal through the bilateral relation with the United States. So we see ourselves as a bridge between Portugal and the United States, and we try to bring the two countries together by linking people and by linking institutions. And typically what we would do, we would give grants for Portuguese students or Portuguese researchers to go to the United States, and vice versa for American students and researchers to come to Portugal. And all these human interconnections now, of course, in times of pandemic, was no longer possible. So we really felt the need to redirect, to make a shift in our activities, because from one point of view, our normal traditional activity was no longer possible because of the pandemic. And at the same time, we saw that there was a need for support in areas like social support in areas where flood usually is not present, because we have defined our four main strategic areas, and they are science, education, cultural, and transatlantic relations. But in these times of needs, and we understood that lots of people would suffer and would have difficulties, we were very much conscious of our social responsibility as a Portuguese foundation. So one of the first things that we decided to do was to donate money to the Portuguese food bank to help alleviate the situation for many families, because we understood that that would be an immediate need. At the same time, we also decided to invest and to support different initiatives. Some of them, Manuel Heitor, the minister, has already spoken. Lots of initiatives regarding scientific investigation and trying to help fight the pandemic. For instance, we support the initiative of the ventilators made in Ceia, as Manuel Heitor was explaining, which was, I mean, they were a team of engineers, and they were able to, in a short period of time, to build the ventilators and to and to have them running, which is really impressive. We also supported the creation of the biobank, a bank of samples for the disease that will help researchers study better the disease. At the same time, we also helped, for instance, with face shields for those that are in the front lines of fighting COVID, like the police, also to the care homes, which is also there is also a particular need for protective equipment. So, I mean, we made a big shift in our normal activity, not only because it was no longer possible to continue funding and making the same activities, but also because we understood there was a need for FLAG as a Portuguese foundation to do something different. And I think we were able to redirect our activity to areas where there was a need, and we were able this way to help lots of people, and that's very important. Thank you.
No, that is great. The work that has been done in Portugal with the pandemic has been really great. And I would also like to ask. Well, we have questions. We have 2 questions for the minister only still, but we might have other questions as well. So, so one of the questions is, I wonder what Minister Heitor thinks of the impact of the pandemic in higher education in Portugal on the long run.
Thank you very much for the question. And that is a question not only in Portugal, but everywhere. First and foremost, we have understood a very fast capacity to adopt distance learning and online education. And that was possible because in the Portuguese case and in many other European countries, we have a public communications network, which was built over the last 30 years throughout Europe, and all higher education students are, since their first day in higher education, automatically linked to so-called EduROM. Without that infrastructure, which was built, improved over the last 25 years or even more, we have not been able to do such a fast change and make available classes online to every single student. But if this is possible, I do also believe that we need to improve our self-criticism and our self-assessment, what can be done and what should not be done through distance education. Actually, we know very well that university campi and university as institutions were created more than 5 centuries before Christ in India, in the Buddhist campus in India, and then were very, very much developed in the 12th century in Europe under the idea of an Italian universitate, which is exactly the way to bring together students, people, and the master. And in fact, over centuries and centuries, all the idea of education and learning and teaching systems were based on the physical presence, particularly associated not only with specific and specialized skills, but also with a number of social skills that we only acquire by discussing, by learning how to criticize, and by a face-to-face interaction. Said this, I also understand that online education has been possible and has improved a number of areas, particularly in theoretical lessons. But we know that in many other topics, for instance, I assisted last month to an online class of a musical instrument in one of the Portuguese universities. And the professor was telling me it's impossible because of the time gap. And we have with us a student of music, and certainly there are some specific issues which will never be replaced by online education, as well as the need to have the social interaction between among students and between students and professors, and the need to build our university and higher education campus, which we know very well, are a very important social issue in all our societies. So, under this context, first of all, we need to guarantee that from next academic year, we have the possibility to have all students in presence in our installations, but in a way that we can also guarantee to all of them safety conditions under the health authority recommendations. And this is important because I also believe that higher education is a very adequate institution for also people to learn how to respect each other, and certainly to be in a classroom or to be in a social event, but understand how they must respect each other and follow sanitary and public health conditions. But at the same time, we know that we should also better combine presential lectures and issues and lab work with online uh, lab in what has been discussed throughout the world under the term blended learning. We know that some type of classes can be better than online, others should not be done. And then the idea is always to move towards a blended system of learning where we certainly understand what needs and can be done online, what can be and should be done inside a classroom or a lab, and what can be done by teamwork only with groups of students or in project-based learning. And I believe the pandemic crisis throughout the world and also in Portugal has called our attention to better discuss these blended learning activities, to better use distance learning when we should, but also to better add value to the social interaction, which is unique in terms of higher education and research environment. And I do believe that this movement towards improving the pedagogy of teaching and learning by really introducing more and more distance learning when we can, and by adding additional value to social interaction under security conditions are a very important movements that I believe all of us will try to foster and promote next year and in the years to come.
Thank you very much. I hope our Nuno Fernandes Tomás is happy with the response, but I believe so. And so I would like to ask Mafalda that we have a question for you as well. So the poet saying, Mafalda, I know that the Met Opera in New York also canceled all the performances for this year. Do you think artists in New York have made a good effort to respond to this situation while still offering an interesting cultural landscape? Were they creative there?
Oh, good question. Well, big companies such as the Met have a lot of inventory that they can pull from. So I feel that orchestras are doing a great job of bringing performances from the past and getting interviews from current members, getting current members to do small online personal performances. There's also plenty that people are doing. I mean, for example, I'm working a lot with senior homes and schools, because senior homes in particular, I mean, there's a lot of seniors that, I mean, all the gatherings are forbidden and families are forbidden to visit them. So there's a lot of isolation and depression happening, and of course confusion depending on mental state as well. So I've been working a lot with these kinds of communities, bringing live concerts and talking to people directly, because even though we're not in presence, there's so much that can come just from connecting like we are right now. We're still having a live conversation. So I do think that musicians are still bringing cultural value, that they're still bringing good art. Of course, it's not the ideal situation, but I feel that there's many good things that are coming from learning technology as well. I mean, for example, for me, learning finally for myself how to use a microphone and things of the sort. So I do think that it's also giving us valuable skills for the future that we can use to full on bring even more interesting programs in the future, is at least my optimistic perspective.
Good. Because the future is exactly my next question that I was going to ask the three of you. What do you see for the future? Do you think that after the pandemic is gone, or will the pandemic be gone? How will we? How do you see the future? We can maybe start by asking Rita Faden.
Yeah, I was thinking.
Yes.
I think it will depend a lot on and the degree of uncertainty that we still have, because we don't know if and when this pandemic will be finished, when all this process will be finished, if we have a cure, if we have a vaccine, all of that. There's there's a huge work being done, but there's a high level of uncertainty at the same time. I think one of the things that we can see, that we can take for sure, is that some of the trends that we were already seeing will accelerate the pace and will increase. For instance, the using online. As we were here discussing, be it on the education, on the way to work, teleworking, also on the way to communicate between each other. The presence of the online will be much more evident in society, and that is something. At the same time, the degree of change, because it's something which I don't know, and I don't think anyone can know at this can be certain at this moment, is that if things will change, or if we will get used very quickly to the new normal. And that is something which I find very interesting, the discussion on how it will be. I tend to be optimist. I think it's easier to live like that. And at the same time, I agree with what Manuel Heitor said at the beginning. We need to learn to live with a certain degree of risk. So slowly by slowly, I think we need to resume some kind of normal life, and we need to continue to do things, because it's not possible to keep a society closed indoors forever. Trying to be safe, trying to, of course, maintaining the rules that we have, but that is important. And I think that little by little, we will be able to resume some kind of normal life. In this context, for instance, because precisely at FLAD, we believe that this is an important discussion, we will be launching a series of webinars, of online conversations such as this, on the concept of what's next. So we are living in the pandemic, and exactly what's next on the different areas where FLAD works. So on cultural, for instance, we will start by cultural on the 18th of June at 6 o'clock Lisbon time. And we will discuss the impact on visual arts of the pandemic, because what we have seen, for instance, is that all the art fairs are now online. And that, of course, has an impact on the way that art is seen, but also on the way that artists can live and how they can, and when people can see the work, and when they can sell the work, and also on the production, because also these difficult times sometimes can be a boost to creativity, and that is something also that we will want to discuss. We will also want to discuss the impact of all this on mental health, because that is something which has been very much discussed, not only from the increase, the uncertainty increases the levels of anxiety, and also the fact that people are much more isolated. So the feelings of depression, all of that, it's the impact of the pandemic on mental health is a very interesting discussion. And also we will discuss on education. We will make a webinar on education, precisely on the impact of what having classes online, if this is a trend to stay, and what impact does this have on the education and on the relationship between the students and professors. And also from the transatlantic relations, we will make a discussion between legislators from Portugal and from the state of Massachusetts, to cross experiences on how parliaments were able to respond to the pandemic and what type of measures were decided. So you can see all these at Vlad's website, and I think it will be interesting, and it has the discussions about the what's next.
Thank you very much. And Manuel Heitor, I would like to ask you what do you see the future? What do you think the future will bring to the society, to us? To what do you think is there in for us?
I will repeat this idea that Rita has also mentioned, and that I referred it before, our needs to better understand, to better live with risk. And this is important because in many of our societies, we have not understood that very, very clearly. And certainly in my role and in my professional role, my main argument is that living with risk can only be done with more knowledge. And certainly a better relation between those which produce knowledge and society at, um, at large. And this has created a number of very critical issues in my view. The very first is to understand the timing associated with science and with knowledge in general. What we are assisting and is that we are able to use existing knowledge that are reliable knowledge, for instance, to produce tests, to produce diagnostics. But we don't have yet the necessary knowledge to produce a vaccine or to produce a therapy. And therefore, this idea that a knowledge-based society requires to understand time because we need to use and reuse and use better the existing knowledge, the reliable knowledge, but also we need to be always aware to produce additional knowledge in areas where we don't know. And I believe the crisis showed to us. We don't know how to produce a vaccine. We don't have yet good therapies to deal with patients with the coronavirus. And we know that a good vaccine or an efficient vaccine will require the minimum of 15 to 18 months. Probably a good therapy may require 4 to 6 months yet. And we know that we know how to do a test. And these questions of time, I believe, is very critical in this area. And in a way, we can foster investments in science. Certainly, the crisis show, particularly in Europe, that the overall expenditure and investment in R&D has not been enough, and actually was very important. The European Commission adopted a resolution to increase the investment in R&D and innovation in the coming years already, and we need to know that we need to better and to increase more that investment, but we also need to better explain to society at large why we need to invest more in knowledge. And the crisis, again, is very interesting because throughout the world, in England, certainly in the United States, in Spain, created a lot of misunderstanding about false testing, rapid testing, what is testing and what is a therapy. And this, again, is a call for scientists themselves that they cannot be closed in their labs just to produce knowledge. They need to be socially responsible, to certainly produce knowledge, but to explain to society what they do and why they do, and exactly to build a trust relationship between those which are professionals of knowledge, scientists in general, and society in general. And this is an important issue, which is not typical also of most of a great part of the scientific community, which again is a very closed down community in certainly in their own work. And we know that a great part of scientists don't spend the necessary time explaining their work. So my conclusion is that we need to foster public and business policies, certainly associated with the increase of knowledge, to provide more funds for a long time. But we also need to ask scientists to be very active in explaining to society what they do, how they do, and how people can trust in knowledge. Last but not least, because we have also here Rita with us, and Vlad has played very critical roles. The crisis has also, or the pandemic crisis, has clear speed up and shown the critical role private for profits, but essentially private foundations play nowadays in the health system. We have seen in the United States with Bill and Gates Foundation, or in the United Kingdom with Wellcome Trust, also in Portugal with FLAG, the cooperation with La Caixa, and more, the global response to the COVID crisis has shown us the need of a collective effort between public and private agencies, where the role of large private foundations together with public agencies will be more and more important in the future. And this is easy to say, is very difficult to put into practice, also because the type of instruments and the type of decision-making processes in private foundations is very much different from those in public institutions. And again, to better agree on the way we draw collective actions between public and private sectors towards the public interest is a very important and will be a great challenge, certainly in Europe at large, where we don't have the tradition, like in the United States, to have a strong action of private foundations. We need, in my understanding, to better understand how to build collective efforts for the public interest and beyond economic interests, particularly of the pharma industry, which we know that do exist, and we need to better understand how can we better frame the need to increase public investment, the need to bring public and private actors, but also to act on the domain of the public interest beyond poor economic interest of a single actor.
Thank you very much. And Mafalda Santos, how do you see the future in music or in your field? How do you see what is coming next?
I think that something that came out of this pandemic that is good is just a generalized awareness of the importance of the arts. So I do think that people, by being isolated at home, by not having anything else to do, I mean, they realize that what they turn to for sanity and for creation is arts. And when I mean arts, I don't mean music. I mean dance, music, visual arts, whatever. So I do think that this awareness is going, or I hope is going to bleed into the future, in the non-pandemic future. So I'm predicting that the first live concerts, which will come, will be just very, very nice events for the musicians and for the audiences. I think that it's going to be wonderful when we finally come back together. You know, it's like doing a barbecue when you've been doing it every single week for 20 years, and then you stop doing it for a whole year. You know, that one barbecue when you come back would be extra special, although they're all good. So I do have these views, and I do hope that we will also apply some of the technology, some of this knowledge that we acquired during this time about technology to later as well. I mean, for example, he can just teach during the summer as well. So he makes these weekly hours of scales that we can join if we want support. And I mean, if this was a regular year, I mean, he wouldn't do that because it's a summer. People go home, people do their things. But since he knows that we're isolated, he's doing this. So why not do it in other years when there's no COVID? So I do think that it brings, of course, there's a lot of bad things, but I do think that it brings some positive outcomes, and that the future, even if with economic hardships for artists, I think we will overcome these challenges.
Thank you. We have one more question for Rita Faden. So the question is, were the scholarships given by flood affected by the pandemic? Is the application process running normally for the coming year?
Yes and no and yes. Following this, so we have maintained through these months always open the process of application for flood scholarship. The reality is that month by month, some of the scholarships, for instance, that we had approved suddenly were no longer possible because everything has changed, and the event, for instance, in the case of the grants and the supports that we give for to participate in conferences, to present papers in conferences, the majority of the conferences were cancelled or were done online. So we maintain the scholarship, the application for the scholarship open, but the reality is that that has changed a lot because the majority of the events has been either cancelled or postponed or is being done online. So some of the, and we will see what happens in fall if is still, if some of the events are possible to do in fall. So we will see. But we maintain the process open.
Thank you. So one last question for the Minister Manuel Heitor. You just told us about the importance of scientists in diagnosis COVID-19 patients and recognize the important role of science in society. What programs will be implemented to support scientists in Portugal? This question is from Joana Lopes.
Thank you very much. We have just during the crisis contributed for the European answer to COVID in early March. And then in Portugal, through the Portuguese Science and Technology Foundation, we have opened a program called Research for COVID, which has already two phases, and at this moment, more than 110 projects are already running. We have also opened a internet website, Science for COVID, to brainstorming and to promote the exchange of research and research ideas, which is also running. In parallel, and third, we have opened a new competition for the use of information systems, particularly artificial intelligence, in the public sector and in close interaction with the public authorities, in a way to bring together research centers and the public health authorities dealing with COVID and other potential pandemics. But the crisis has also shown that we identify a number of very key experts in Portugal in many areas, from immunology to pathology to cardio systems, but we have identified that we miss specific areas of research excellence, for instance, in virology science. Therefore, we open a new call over 5 consecutive years to produce new doctorates and to sponsor new doctorates in order to build this research community, which certainly was identified during the crisis to need to be strengthened so that we can better deal with the training of advanced human resources in the virus areas. But the most important probably is at a wide European level, the recovery plan, which is being prepared over the last weeks and will be prepared over the coming months to be launched by the end of the year and to be implemented in the coming 3 years, 2021, 22, and 23. Certainly, this will be a major recovery plan at an European-wide level, and we are particularly engaged in certainly making science more inclusive of the Portuguese society, and in fact, build an European society with more Portugal and more Portugal with European research skills. But definitely, most of the activities need to be global activities we are very much, again, promoting our participation in European programs. And certainly, as always, we look at transatlantic cooperation, particularly with the United States, as an opportunity to foster new ideas, to foster new research careers, and to foster better quality of life.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank the three of you for being here today with us and for accepting our invitation to be here. Thank you very much. Thank you for your insights. Thank you for your time, and a happy day of Portugal, the Camões, and the Portuguese communities to you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're
Thank
welcome. Mafalda, I don't know if you have just a few minutes, because we will now have the concert of Mafalda. We will now have Mafalda's concert and at 5 o'clock. And I would like to ask you a little bit of questions if you have time.
Oh, sure.
Okay, Mafalda. We will have maybe 10 minutes or so to talk about the concert. So how was it for you to do the concert in isolation, let's say, and not being able to perform it live?
Right, so my idea, since it was Portugal Day, was to make a program just with Portuguese tunes. And of course, I had many things to choose from, but I've been particularly obsessed with folk music. So I decided to go in this route. And we have wonderful harmonizations for chorus from Lopes Graça. He's a composer from 20th century. And I've always been obsessed. My aunt is a singer, so I've heard all these things growing up. So I've always been kind of obsessed with these harmonizations. So I mean, if there's an instrument that can replace voice, and of course voice is not replaceable, but if we were to try, I think that the cello is pretty close. So I thought of doing the ambitious thing of doing chorales and doing these choral pieces just on cello. So of course how this works is just layering myself 4 times. So for each piece, I mean, 30 seconds of music that you hear will have hundreds of hours of me being frustrated to produce, just a tiny bit of music. So I don't know, the process was 4 voices at least. Some had a bit more per song, and I have a very good friend actually who I'm staying with, my friend Ellen Gruber. She helped me put this together and with the recordings, so it's a lot of software involved as well. So it was an interesting process, challenging, but we learned from it.
Thank you so much, Mafalda. Thank you for being able to put this concert together for us. And I hope you stay for Mafalda's concert at 5 o'clock, again in our Facebook page and in our YouTube page as well. Thank you very much, and see you soon at your concert. Thank you.
Thank you.